Hello and welcome to Yesterday's Coffee, the podcast where we chat about fitness, nutrition, and business all over coffee that may or may not have been brewed yesterday. Today we are covering how to use your weight loss tools, and we're going to dive into what we actually mean by that, because there's a very specific order of operations that we follow when we're thinking about taking somebody through a weight loss journey, and knowing how and when to use those tools is going to have a major impact on how much progress you make and how long you make progress for.
Well, we have already talked about how we know we're going to experience plateaus, and your weight loss tools are things that you can manipulate as you go through a program or as you work towards a weight loss goal that you will be, pretty regularly tweaking as you go through it in order to keep up your progress.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important, whether you're doing this on your own or whether you're working with someone, it's important to understand what these tools are and how to use them so that you don't throw too many tools at the problem at once and burn yourself out, which is pretty common.
Yep.
Or so that you better understand why your coach maybe doesn't want you to do HIIT cardio 6 days a week on your fat loss program.
Yep. Perfect
So
example.
you just need to understand, again, what they are and how to use them regardless of how you're approaching this goal.
Mm-hmm. And so with weight loss, we have two main roads that we can go down, either when we're first starting or whenever we've reached that plateau and we need to make an adjustment. And so the most basic changes you can make are changes in the amount of movement that you're doing or activity or exercise, or decreasing the amount of food that you're eating.
Because on the most basic level, your weight loss goal is most impacted by calorie balance.
Right.
We know that. We know that that's kind of at the top of the hierarchy of what matters when it comes to a weight loss goal. So again, to enhance or I guess adjust your calorie balance, we're typically talking about increasing a deficit.
Right.
So we can increase your deficit by taking some calories away, or we can add additional activity.
Right.
So those are kind of the two main
Well,
categories.
and what we're really doing is maintaining the deficit, because as your body changes over time, its resting metabolic rate is going to drop as you've been in a deficit and as your weight starts to decline. And so that's why it's so important to understand that, especially if you have a very large weight loss goal, the place that you start and the place that you finish are going to be very different. Mm-hmm. And that's why one of the first things that we always have to deal with a lot of people that have been chronic dieters is that if you're coming to us with very, very low calories already, there's probably, unless you've been doing something incredibly wrong and just completely miscounting or not accounting for crazy binges on the weekend or something like that, then there's a very high likelihood that we need to work backwards to have a much higher starting point, because in order to get that weight loss going for a long enough time to take all that weight off that you're looking to lose, it's going to take a major change in the amount of calories that you're able to consume and burn off in that period, versus if you're just coming in and you can only barely lose weight on 1,200 calories, that's not going to last long.
No, absolutely. So I totally lost my train of thought.
So overall, I mean, we've got these two different these two different directions we can go. We've got movement, we've got the decrease in food intake. So let's break those down.
Oh, so what I was going to say is when you need to maintain that deficit. So when it's time to make a change, when you hit a plateau, how do we make that choice? How do we make that choice to increase movement or to decrease food intake?
It's a good question. So it depend on...
Because you don't want to do all the tools at once. That's the point. Yeah. We want you to make your way through these tools. You don't use all of them at once together.
You want to use as few as possible. And the reason for that is to prolong your progress, because you're only going to get so much out of each individual thing. And where a lot of people make the mistake is throwing everything at it at once. So you come from having no regularity with your training or your nutrition to training 6 days a week and cutting your calories super low, as we've talked about a million times. You're using two very effective tools, but you're using everything that you have out of both of those immediately, and that's going to lead to probably burnout, maybe overtraining, and definitely a massive plateau that you're going to have to rebuild from anyways. So that is kind of the crux of why we don't want to do everything at once. But how you decide where to go first has a lot to do with your current conditioning and what you've been doing. So if you're somebody that hasn't been doing any activity at all, then just getting up and doing some regular movement without even looking at your diet is probably going to shave a few pounds off. Whereas if you have been exercising regularly and you haven't paid too much attention to the nutrition side, then obviously that's the place to start. And those are, of course, very easy examples.
On a very basic level,
right.
Like a beginner level.
Right. And then as you get going further into it, a lot of it will start to depend on how you're feeling. So your energy levels, your hunger levels. So if we've gotten you to a point where hunger is starting to become a bit of an issue, then I would try to opt for more movement instead of cutting your calories even further, because that's just going to be that much more difficult. Or vice versa. If you're feeling good and like you can cut things a little bit harder on the diet side, but you're feeling a little bit more fatigued on the exercise side, the last thing I'm going to do is push more exercise. And so in that case, but that's also something that you got to balance too, because you don't necessarily want to be cutting calories when you're already feeling exhausted. So there's a lot to it.
Yeah, there's a lot to balance. I would say that a big factor would be the schedule, your schedule. Do you have time?
Yeah.
Do you have time to increase your activity level? Do you have time to get to the gym another day, or to add an evening walk, or to increase your steps? Do you have the time? So I think that's a really good place to look. And if you do, and if you you're at a calorie level where you could continue to cut down and you're in a good spot where you could add more activity, sometimes it also comes down to your preference. What would you like to do? Do you feel good about adding some more activity? Is that something that you think is sustainable and realistic for you? Or do you think, you know what, I feel like, at the end of the day, I'm feeling like on the very full side, so I could probably stand to drop some calories and see how it goes.
Yep. Yeah, no, preference is a huge thing. Whenever I'm personally going through a cut, I will keep my calories pretty much in the same spot for as long as I can while just incrementally pushing my cardio up until I have to reach that tipping point, because that's just what I like to do. I like to eat food.
Yeah, same.
So that
and sometimes I give my clients the choice. Yeah. We get to a point where it could go either way. They do have the flexibility in their schedule. They do have some extra calories they could cut. So I ask them, like, what would you rather do? Do you want to build it into your routine to add another day of activity or add more intensity? Or would you rather, cut out a snack?
Right. And I have clients that would absolutely hate adding in any more walking or additional cardio or anything like that. So they're going to take the calorie cut and they're fine with that. So that knowing which one you prefer and having it obviously line up with what makes the most sense relative to what else you've been doing is very important. And so obviously there's much more nuance to just moving more or eating less. And so that's what we want to break down now. So as for the movement options, obviously we've got a couple of different things where if we're doing things properly, we should be doing a combination of resistance training, and probably we have some cardio in there. And there's plenty of different things that we can do within that. So even just in the resistance training, one of the easiest things you can start to do as you transition to fat loss or to accelerate your fat loss is just shortening your rest periods and creating a denser workout so that you're keeping your heart rate elevated, you're burning off more calories in a shorter period of time, which starts to get you into that almost HIIT-like zone where we're going into like EPOC, excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, and creating an oxygen debt that burns off more calories after the end of the workout. And that's the same idea behind HIIT training. And then we can also just increase the overall volume. So throw some more sets in there. If you've been doing 3 sets of 10 forever, try a 4th set. Or obviously you can change up the rep schemes.
Or add a day.
Yeah,
if you're starting at 3 days a week and you feel ready for maybe a 4th, that's pretty significant. So that would be a situation where you might add that 4th day, and we might even give you a little bit more to eat, depending on where your calories sit at that point.
Yep. Definitely a possibility.
So then on the other side, we've got your different methods of cardio. So one that I think gets really overlooked is just your overall daily movement and your daily steps.
Everybody's so obsessed with HIIT training.
Well, people downplay the steps, and it's like if you look at a breakdown of where you're spending most of your calories or where you're burning most of your calories in a day, it's supporting your body in your daily life. That makes up the largest portion of calories burned for you in your day.
That's a really good misconception that I want to bring up, is the idea that your workouts are supposed to burn all your calories.
No.
That's not even close.
You burn most of your calories being alive every day.
Your workout is the most insignificant amount of calories that you burn. Unless you're like a triathlete or ultra marathoner.
Sure.
Yeah, then we've got something else to talk about. If you're not running 100 miles in the day, then you're just staying alive is going to be 80% of the calories that you burn. So looking at your exercise and being like, and depending on whatever is spitting out this number for you and saying, oh, I only burned 500 calories today. No,
and
you burned
bad about
500 in addition to your basal metabolic rate and everything else, which is significantly higher than that rate. So that's not taking into account hardly any of the calories that you're actually burning. That's just kind of an aside there that I think is worth mentioning.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of good charts online where you can kind of see the breakdown of your total calorie expenditure for the day. And you'll see that basal metabolic rate, the calories it takes to keep you alive and functioning every day, make up the largest percentage, and your calories burned from exercise are like a teeny tiny little bar at the top.
Yep.
It's so insignificant. I shouldn't say insignificant, but you need to realize how much power your body truly has to burn calories on its own and leverage that, especially if you don't have the time or aren't ready to approach another day at the gym or more intentional workout time.
Right. And so the additional steps or movement is only going to add to that base of calories that you're burning.
And I would say that daily movement is a lot easier to turn into a habit, and it's more sustainable. It's more realistic to think that you could get up a couple times during your workday and take a couple laps around the office, or walk up and down the stairs a couple more times, or take an evening walk after dinner. Those things are all things that tend to be more realistic than something that usually has to be planned and takes a little bit more time, like driving to the gym for a workout.
Yep. Yeah, and if you're the type of person that is on the phone with clients all the time and you have the ability, schedule walks for those.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I do. If I'm on the phone with a client, that's when I'm walking, whether that's just around the backyard or up and down the street or whatever, just to get additional movement in. And obviously not everyone has that luxury, but if you do, you can work it in.
Absolutely. So daily movement, daily steps, that's a great place to look, especially if adding some more intentional workouts doesn't feel realistic for you at that time. Or if your daily movement is already on the low side, again, that's a really easy tool to work on that's not going to take too much away from your day.
Right. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be HIIT training. Like, it doesn't have to be the most intense thing in the world to burn body fat. But on the other side of that, if you are really strapped for time and we do need to elevate your calories that you're burning from movement, that's where HIIT can be great because we're condensing the workload into a much shorter period of time. And so that's why it seems very attractive for people. But to perform HIIT properly, it's very painful, very uncomfortable. And it's short. Like maybe you're doing 5-10 minutes of it.
I mean, it's typically 10 minutes max usually if it's true HIIT.
Right. But it's brutal. And like Tabata is 4 minutes. And you look at that on paper and you're like, oh, I can work out for 4 minutes. But it's
brutal.
It's brutal 4 minutes versus I could go take a 30-minute walk and just enjoy it. And so that's something that you've got to be able to decide on. And the other thing that you need to take into account is those HIIT sessions create a large deal of fatigue. And that's something that you're not going to have to necessarily deal with the lower intensity cardio. And so if we're trying to just force in a bunch of HIIT and your calories are super low and you're not ready to recover from that, your body's going to need to take a break, and it'll probably force you to by either having some sort of little nagging injury pop up, or you'll get a little cold or something like that.
Your body will stop you at a certain point.
Yeah, because you're not used to it, and it's tough. It's not me saying don't do HIIT. HIIT is absolutely great when used in the right places. But if you're somebody that hasn't been very active, HIIT's the last place I would jump to. Well, I would just get you moving first.
Well, but even on the other side, I tend to see people overusing HIIT who are, I would say, intermediate to advanced level and who already maybe train pretty intensely with weights 5 days a week. And so again, you have to think about your total recovery capacity and the overall like fatigue that you're going to experience if you're adding in all these HIIT training sessions.
Yeah.
So again, if you're somebody who's strapped for time and maybe you are still kind of in that intermediate category, but your schedule keeps you at like 3 days in the gym per week, HIIT might be a really good option for you. Number one, because it's time effective, but number two, because 3 days a week in the gym is probably not going to overtax you.
Right. Yeah, you're gonna need time to recover between those sessions if you're actually performing them at the intensity that it should be. High intensity is no joke. It's not 4 minutes of a moderate run.
And if you're not necessarily to the level where you can do true HIIT as it's intended or designated, that doesn't mean that you can't get your own version of higher intensity cardio, maybe doing some higher intensity intervals that aren't true HIIT, but like still kind of filling that that same category.
At the end of the day, it's relative to your max heart rate. Yeah. So like obviously different people are going to have different things that take them to that intensity because the intensity is individual. But I think that's a pretty good breakdown of movement and how you should use it order and hierarchy wise. And so that brings us to the second option, which is the calorie adjustments, decreasing food intake overall. So obviously that is a super simplified way to look at it, just lowering calories. The two things that we really want to look at are the two macros that we would actually be lowering. So in dropping your calories, we're never going to be taking calories from protein if protein is set at the right point. There's no reason to drop it. In fact, in certain instances with more steep cuts, there's actually going to be some reasoning to increase protein intake. So if we're talking about dropping your calories, the two things we're looking at are fats and carbs. And so how do we determine where do we go with that?
So this one, I would say, number one, depends on the types of activities you're doing or how much activity you're doing, because we know that your carb needs, I guess I should say, or, carb intake kind of lines up or should line up with your overall energy output, how active you are, and the demands of that activity. So for someone who maybe is doing a little bit more HIIT, I might give them some more carbs because their body is going to be a little bit more fatigued and they may need a few more. But other times it comes down to preference. So other times I, again, might ask a client, hey, would you prefer to drop a couple carbs this week or would you prefer to drop a couple fats?
Yeah, preference is a huge piece of it. And like you were saying in the beginning, the intensity of the exercise is really the key there. So if you've got somebody that is just doing very little high intensity work, so maybe they've got only a few basic strength training sessions through the week, and then the rest of their week is filled with either rest days or low intensity cardio, then that's where it's going to make more sense to get rid of the carbs because we're not really using them. We don't really have a need for them.
Well, because I guess I should explain that a little better. So your higher intensity activities are going to be more fueled by carbohydrates, and your lower intensity activities are more fueled by fats. So again, as Kyle was saying, for somebody who's doing more lower intensity activity or who's a little bit more sedentary, their body and their weight loss progress is probably going to respond a lot better to a lower percentage of carbs to a higher percentage of fats in their diet.
A super simplified way to think about it is if your heart rate's under 120, probably going to be using more fats. If it's over 120, probably going to be using more carbs. And obviously that number is going to fluctuate person to person.
If you know what your heart rate feels like when it's at 120.
Well, if you've got a heart rate monitor.
Sure.
Yeah, so if you're able to track that, you can kind of see that's a very, very generalized thing. Those numbers can change even within that.
If you're unable to keep up with conversation, that's usually that point where you're more high intensity.
Yeah, and so that's kind of an easy way to think about it. And then preference is going to be the king from there. So because one of the things that people always get hung up on are cutting carbs, because cutting your carbs immediately causes some weight loss, and that's because of the water that you lose with it. So don't worry about that. It's going to be much more related to the actual movement that you're doing, how hard you're working, and then the foods that you actually want to eat to fill up those calories that you do have.
Well, and you can also use this as a tool throughout the week. So you don't necessarily need to only think about where to pull back fat and carbs when it's time to cut calories. You can also think about this as something that can fluctuate throughout the week if your calories are still controlled, but maybe one day you're working a little harder in your workouts and you'd like more carbs to eat, you can do that and scale back your fats. Or maybe the next day you're really craving a higher fat food option. Again, still controlling our calories, you can increase those fats and drop those carbs.
Yeah.
So generally we're keeping protein really consistent, but those carbs and fats can fluctuate based on the demands of your day, based on your preference, based on your cravings, which is better. It feels really good to have that flexibility and say, I'm craving this thing or I want to fit in this meal, and I can.
Right. At the end of the day, if you're keeping protein and calories constant, the fat and carb fluctuation, unless you're training for something ultra specific and you've got a very specific energy demand, whether we're talking about a marathon or something in that line, then you can get away with just about anything as far as the ratio of carbs and fats goes with keeping those two things
So that's a really great
constrained.
tool to use as you go throughout this process to keep things sustainable, to keep you more sane throughout the process, especially if you're getting, a little bit burnt. You can bring in some more flexibility or some more foods that you're craving.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the tip of the iceberg with intuitive eating, getting into that type of stuff.
Absolutely.
And so beyond just the macronutrient changes, because obviously we've got to create that deficit, there are some tools that you can use to help stave off hunger within these changes. So what are some of those things that you can do?
So number one, when you're in a weight loss program or a fat loss program, I know that I constantly preach that, you shouldn't be starving, and you absolutely shouldn't, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to experience any hunger. And I think that's a little bit of a misconception. If you're in a calorie deficit, realistically, you probably will feel hungry at a certain point and you may be through your calories for the day. And while I don't recommend pushing through any intense hunger or low blood sugar situations, if it's just kind of a little nag or a little annoyance, in order to see that progress, you might have to power through a little bit.
I like to think of it as feeling like a little bit light when you go to bed.
Yeah, a little bit light. Again, you might have a little bit of an empty feeling in your stomach, but you shouldn't be ravenous.
Right.
That's not what we're talking about. So in that situation, it's good to take a look at, number one, your macros and how, they stack up across the day, but also maybe taking a look at the fiber content in the foods you're eating or the volume specifically in the foods you're eating. So volume foods are great. So things like, low calorie vegetables, lettuces, leafy greens, a lot of vegetables, really. Yeah. Vegetables are really great volume. Number one, they're great volume because they take up a lot of space. But number two, they are also higher in fiber, which can bring that satiety piece too.
Yeah. And so if we're thinking of volume of just from calories and not even thinking about the macros, think of how much lettuce or fibrous greens or really any cruciferous vegetables you could eat and the low calorie count that that's going to provide versus a tablespoon of peanut butter. There's the amount of vegetables you'd have to eat to make up for that little tablespoon of peanut butter is immense. And so if you extrapolate that out over a larger amount of calories, then you'll see that you can fill up a lot of space with a lot fewer calories if you're planning things out properly. And that is kind of the element beyond just the calories in, calories out, because yes, at the base level, you could eat just about anything if it's fitting within your macros and see body composition progress. But what changes is within the quality of the food differences and the volume of the food is how you feel and how your body processes energy from that.
It impacts your appetite, your cravings, your satiety, your hunger hormones. Different foods are going to impact you differently.
Absolutely.
So yes, absolutely, you could eat all of your calories in peanut butter and you're going to be getting enough calories to sustain you, but you're going to feel really empty and probably really hungry, even though you have plenty of calories to work with.
Yep. Yeah, it's a very different feeling. So just having, and that's where vegetables are really helpful in a diet is just adding that volume without the additional calories. And one of my favorite snacks in that realm is pickles, because here you've got this large thing that you can actually bite off, chew on, has flavor to it, but there's no calories to it. And so that's a really easy snack there, in addition to obviously salads or any other veggies that you could do sides with. I love
big salads or or zoodles.
Yeah.
Zucchini.
Yeah, you've been doing a lot of zoodles.
I've been doing a lot of zoodles, or you can add shredded zucchini to certain things. I've seen people add shredded zucchini to their oatmeal or to their eggs. It just kind of bumps up, again, the overall volume. It's a very mild flavor, and you could add it to anything.
Well, and it just gives you that feeling that you're eating more.
Yeah. Or another really good one is like cauliflower rice, adding it to your regular portion of rice to feel like you get to eat more.
Yeah.
But it's coming at a lower calorie and
cauliflower mashed potatoes, too.
Yeah, exactly. You can do half
Very
and half.
good one, yeah.
So there are a lot of good volume swaps that you can make to feel like you're eating the same amount of food, especially after a calorie cut, but the calories are going to come in lower.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think those are all really great options. So what about, do you have any recommendations for our sweet tooth people out there?
So I am more in the camp of kind of building in the things that you're craving. I'm also more of the have some dark chocolate after your meals if needed kind of person.
Well, yeah, but let's say you've done that and you're out of calories.
So a lot of the things that you recommend, I just don't. I just don't.
So we're going to disagree.
We might. Yeah. Well, I don't think it's necessarily a disagreement. I just think generally I'm telling people to probably drink more water because most of my clients are maybe not hitting their water goals.
Well, right.
As opposed to trying to trick themselves into thinking they're not hungry.
What if it's I just need this taste or this thing, or I'm going to just go out on an all-out binge?
Well, I mean...
Because obviously water's not going to stop that.
Well, yeah, of course. No. So if you need a little bit of something to chew on, something sweet, yes, you could do a sugar-free gum, or you could do a diet soda, I guess.
Hesitation in her voice. So there.
No, there's nothing wrong with it. Those are perfectly fine. I just think it really doesn't matter the environment that you're in to go towards those foods. Yeah. So I would say, are you really being satisfied by the rest of your foods first before taking a look at some of these things?
Sure, absolutely. These are kind of these are Band-Aids.
These are Band-Aids.
That's all these are.
These are a lot of the things that stereotypically are found in poor weight loss diets. Right. This is why I'm hesitant.
So these are not fixes to your plan overall. These are, you've nailed all your basics, you've got all the stuff in there that you need, and this is just to kind of help you.
And maybe you want a little something extra.
This is to help you with your sanity throughout. And so having some gum around is an awesome option. This is great if you're at the office and your coworkers are always bringing in food.
That's a good situation.
Having gum is amazing. I used to use that all the time, and I recommend that to my clients all the time, and they love it because it's now I can at least take my mind off of the cupcake that's sitting across the desk from me. Diet soda, so just having some flavor. This is not a recommendation to replace all of your fluids with diet soda. That's not what I'm saying. You need to make sure that you're drinking all of the water that you need, and then you can add a diet soda to that, and that's perfectly fine. And then beyond that, my absolute favorite fix for needing a real sweet is Halo Top ice cream, as we've talked about before. A million different flavors. Now, I would be a little bit leery of the keto ice creams that they're putting out because now those
I feel like those are getting people.
Are 900 calories. And they're great because you see just on the front of the package 1 gram of net carbs. And in your mind, Halo Top's always been 200, 300, maybe 400 calories. Now these things are 800, 900 calories. And if you're eating that pint instead of the original 240 calorie one that they made 3 years ago, that is a completely different story. I don't care if there's totally no carbs in it. It doesn't matter. If you're 900 calories over your caloric limit, you're going to be putting weight on, not taking it off.
Absolutely. So
pay attention to that. Yeah, those are out there now.
You need to be careful. You need to look at the labels. I always tell people to look at the labels.
Yeah, always
no matter what it is, not just the front of the label, the back of the label. Look at your nutrition facts.
Well, because that almost got me. Because the first time I saw it, I was like, wow, they really brought it down to 1 gram. And then I flipped it around. I was like, are you serious?
Well, because I feel like most people don't really understand what real keto is. Real keto is very, very, very high fat. For anyone who doesn't understand that, it's not just no carbs and higher fats. It's very, very high fat.
Right. So yeah, I mean, you could fit this ice cream into a real ketogenic diet. That's not what I'm talking about.
Easily, if you're doing keto the right way.
Most people
might need something like this.
Aren't doing keto the right way. No. Most people just think of it as low carb.
It's just a low calorie diet at that point.
Oh, I'm low carb. I can eat this 900 calorie ice cream.
Sure. Great.
The Ben & Jerry's right next to it is 1,000 calories. Yeah. Like, what's the difference? Like, yeah, there's sugar in it, but overall your weight's really not going to be that greatly affected.
Yeah. So there are some, lower calorie sweet swaps that you can make if you aren't able to build some of those foods in regularly. So this might be towards the end of a fat loss program where your calories are on the very low side. That I think would be an ideal time to use some of these tools. So again, all these different tools to use at all these different times in those 2 categories of movement or food, nutrition.
Yep.
And just to kind of summarize those again, we've got weight training as a great tool. We've got high intensity cardio, low intensity cardio, and even just daily movement, basic steps. Those are all really great tools to use in different situations. And then we've got, your calorie changes, your macro changes. We have high volume foods that you can use. We have, some low calorie swaps and, tips and tricks that you can use. So again, you don't want to throw all these tools at your progress or at your problem at once. You kind of want to make your way through. And again, a lot of it is preference based. So take a look at your schedule, take a look at, what you can realistically budget in terms of time, and kind of decide from there what the best tools to use for your situation are.
Yep. Start with as few as you need and then sprinkle in.
You can always increase.
Yeah.
And I would give yourself a solid 2 weeks to see if it's going to work.
Yeah.
Don't add one tool and then 2 days later add another and then 2 days later. Again, consistency over time is what's going to show you progress.
And don't have a great week, ruin it on the weekend, and then throw everything you've got at it the next week, because that's just as bad.
Exactly.
And that's how you get into these terrible cycles of starving yourself, binging, and just repeating the process. So if you do fall off, reset, don't make changes, because that wasn't the reason. The plan initially wasn't the reason you didn't see progress. It was the awful weekend that you had or whatever it was. But yeah, no, I think those are great tips, a great hierarchy to follow. Listen to what you need and go from there.
Absolutely.
Anything else to add?
I don't think so. I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for tuning in this week. If you've got anything you'd like us to cover in future episodes, you can reach out to myself at hypertrofit.com, and you can find Alexa at therootedrd.com. And we'll see you guys again next week.
And we'll see you guys next week.